In Part 1 of Beyond Charity, Dr. Perkins gave us the foundational 3 R's. In this Part 2, he expands on the holistic approach to Christian community development with a presentation of all 8 key components.
When after my conversion, I went back to Mississippi, and I saw this apartheid system again, and the Christians had accommodated themselves to it. The way I saw that system then, that the young people had lost hope in the community, and they had developed a self-hatred that was destructive and killing each other in the society. And I could see the problem. And I remember saying to my wife, I said, honey, if we're going to make a difference in this little town, we've got to reverse this. What we got to do is stay in this little community long enough that we could win some of these young people to Jesus Christ. We got to disciple them in their faith. We got to help them to get a love for God, a love for themselves, and a love for the community. That's a greater love than consumerism and materialism, because that's what the society was doing, was telling them meaning was going to come for the things, and they would become addicted to themselves in the society. I could see that. And then we got to help them to go outside of the state of Mississippi, because the Mississippi education was designed to reinforce our inferiority and to lose hope in ourselves that we could do anything ourselves, that we was actually created in the image of God, and that we could participate in stewardship of this resources of the world, and that we could participate in carrying this good news of the gospel outside of our village to around the world. And I wanted to participate in that in the society. And so that became the goal. It was out of that this whole Christian community development movement began. And it was based on then trying to raise up indigenous people from the community. Indigenous people don't do well nowhere in the world. I have traveled around the world with World Vision and other organizations, and indigenous people do bad all over the world, anywhere. First Nation people don't do well. We overexploit them in the world. And so my people in Mississippi, to that extent, they were the indigenous slaves in Mississippi when I came along. And how could we liberate them? How could this gospel that delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, how could this gospel deliver us? And that's what Christian community development is about. That's at the heart of it. That's at the heart of it. This is not another program. This is reclaiming the essence of the gospel, the whole gospel to the whole person, to the whole world. That's what it's about. So this is not a new program that we're tacking on to it. We're reclaiming the essence of the gospel. And so what came out of that, and I'll be finished, what is the philosophy? What is the philosophy? We first came up with what we call the 3 R's of development. We looked at that. And then as we created this Christian community development movement, we began to look at what made good community. What was the ingredients that go into good community? What did we have to deal with? What was holistic development? What was a concern for the body, the soul, and the spirit? And of course, people are going to do different things within the community. And we need to be working with them. And that don't take us away from those particular calling and ministries. But we're talking about here a way of life, a way of doing ministry. It's more than just a single purpose. In our organization, we got all organizations, and we want them to keep their focus because God has raised them up. But what we want them to do is to see the whole person, the need for the whole person. And then, of course, work together in that community, bring others together who are not meeting that need. Then you're meeting this need, and you'll work together, and you're concerned for the total development of the whole community. That's the idea of community development. This is not to carry you in some other direction. It's to bring a sense of fullness. That's what I find out. I like to go around people, and I'm always drawn to people who are different from me. because they enriches my life. They bring something to my life I don't have. That's what friendship is. Friendship is that you see a little of what's missing in you, in the other person, and you want to be around that person, that you don't know why you want to be around them. But you see what is missing in you. That's what friendship is all about. Is that we desperately need each other in life. And so our life is enriched by our coming together. The little nursery rhyme, the more we get together, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. And getting together with people who are different from me enriches my life. I listen to you, and I know what I know, and now I know what you know. And together our lives are being enriched. We are sharing our lives with each other. That's what the church is about. That's what the fellowship is about. That's why we sing in the church. We sing in the church. This encourages us. We repeat the things of one another together. We get music together. And so what was the principles? The principles then of developing indigenous leaders. And that is so important. That's hard. You will say, what about the indigenous? It's hard. It's hard because we haven't, so that is a challenge. It's hard when we have been doing that. It's hard for us to get away from that colonization. And that was the one thing that I really, when we created this CCD movement, I was very reluctant to not carry it into other nations too fast. I wanted other nations to come there, and we learn from them, and they learn from us. And then they go back and establish a CCDA of Canada, a CCDA of the other, because I'm afraid of colonizing. I'm afraid of making you more of my whole national interest. Then I have to invade people because they got more oil on the ground, and I don't control that. So I got to invade that land in order to let them have to oversee with their national resources. And so that's my national interest. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of that. We ought to be able to do free trade. We ought to be able to do exchange that enriches each people. We ought not to have to outsource everything to the world. We ought to be able to supply work and opportunity for our people in their own land, in their own environment, and then make some kind of equal exchange to people. And Christians ought to be promoting that in the world if we're going to promote peace and justice in the world. And so this was where my thoughts came from. First of all, how do we raise up these little indigenous leaders? So we said that we got to get the kids a little educated, somewhat, put them on the process, keep them in school, tutor them, help them to get through because they've been so deprived of hope. And we had to feed them and help them. Then tutor them when they went out to college. They didn't know how to compete with people who had all these opportunities, so we had to help them when they come back. In the summertime, we had to prepare them to go back to college so they could, and then we was hoping that 5% of them, or 3% of them would come back to the community and be the leaders, because in those poor countries, there's a brain drain. In the poor community, there's a brain drain. And so the gangs take over, the strong people with the guns, and the strong physical people, they take over the community and suppress the good people within the neighborhood. And so we wanted to bring leadership back. And so we came up with the idea of relocation. Relocation. How do we get those people to go off to school and relocate? It wasn't original thought of getting you to relocate. That wasn't the main. But if you want to do good development, oh, it's so good to relocate, because Jesus did that. That's the big truth in heaven. Though he was God, he thought it not robbery to be equal with God. He left heaven and he came down and he identified with us. And because of his humility with us, he was able to lift us up And I've seen those people who do that. Their children are enriched. Their lives, they're not fearful. They're not racial fearful. They're not fearful of people different. I watch missionary children. I remember when I got my first honorary doctor's degree at Wheaton, the kids fell in love with me, and I fell in love with them. And what I discovered was those kids who I fell in love with so quickly was the daughters and sons of those people who had gone to Africa. And they had so intermingled with people, they wasn't afraid of them. And so they could love. They weren't held back with their love in the society. And so your life would be so enriched when you get to know people and respect people and believe that people have some enrichment in their life. And so relocation is incarnational. There's plenty you can do without relocating. If all the people relocate, they call that gentrifying the community. And that means the poor won't have nowhere to live, so we don't want all the rich people to come back. You know, they're setting the housing prices too high. You know, so that's not good economics. And people that's not good economics. But if you want leadership, the thing that you have to do even when you relocate in the community, you have to be careful, because what's going to happen after about 10 years, you're going to become so powerful, and you become conscious of it. And that's why I've lived basically about 10 or 12 years in these 50 years in 4 different places. Because the people is a place where you empower them, but there become a place where you become too powerful. And you don't want to be a cult leader, and then you'll become a dictator, and you undermine people's dignity. What you go there to do is to release their creativity so they can take some possession of the land and the community. And so it's time to leave. And so relocation. Second area of development is reconciliation. That's what it's all about. I guess you know that. Reconciliation is to bring peace and justice. Peace and justice. And peace and justice go together. They are one and the same. Peace and justice go together. And so reconciliation is to make peace. Reconciliation to make people love each other. God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. So reconciliation. The third area was what we call redistribution. Oh man, that really got people scared. Because back in those days, it was the Cold War. And it was these communists, and I sound like a communist. It sounded like what I was going to do is take all the money from the rich and give it to the poor. I said, that's too simple. I said, if you took all the money from the rich and give it to the poor, the rich would have it back tomorrow night. Because the poor would go out and buy used Mercedes. That would be the quickest exchange. That don't even make sense. But people go on that kind of stupidity, and they use that as scare tactic to people. That's the way they did our health care. We couldn't get health care because you Canadians got this bad stuff. Y'all love y'all folks, and you would like to have all of them to have a little health care. But in my nation, if all of people have a little health care, we won't have nothing for ourselves. We got the biggest universities, the biggest medical schools, we got all that stuff. We got everything it takes to make doctors and nurses. It don't make sense. Selfishness go insane at some place. Selfishness and greed become insane. It is not compatible to human development. So redistribution is more than money. I think, of course, money is a means to good ends. I know that in society. But I think we have almost deified it. We don't almost think that we can't think good without having money. And thinking ought to be before all that. That's what money should be made out of. Good thoughts, good motivation, good ideas of goods and services and supplies and demand. You know, good ideas. That's what wealth is made out of. And so that's what I'm talking about. How do we educate people? How do we provide those goods and those services to a society? And so that's redistribution. And how do we bring that motivation? How do we create that place in society? Number 4 is leadership development. Anytime that God sees a problem, he raises up a leader. God is not a herding God. God is a leadership God. Leadership development, of course, that's all of God's accomplishment on earth, basically, comes from human initiative, that God initiates leadership. And when God has a problem in society, he calls leaders and sends them into the midst of the problem that God wants to solve. So leadership development and discipleship making is the key to God's involvement in human affairs. So when Jesus came, God incarnated, he got some disciples and he trained them. You and I know about God and we worship God really because of those disciples. They're the ones who perpetuated his life and teaching here on earth. And so we carry that on, and so disciples become important. And so how do we then develop those leaders within the community? And then, of course, from Christian, we should see the church as the main entity. While we got these good parachurch organizations to render these unique services, but if they're going to be Christian, then those people need to be a part of a local congregation where they fellowship with each other. That's so important. We have learned that. We've learned it. We understood it. We've learned it through experience. Our best development, our people are anchored in a local congregation in the church. And so it should be anchored in local congregation. In the church, it don't have to be the same congregation. It can be those people who recognize they need each other and they're being nurtured by each other within the fellowship of believers. And so the church becomes centric. Church-based, and the idea, and that's something now that you almost find resistance today because parachurch organizations have become so successful and they are so fluent. And they are less institutionalized. You know, they are more relevant to the needs of people within the society than the church. And we have made the church pretty much a worship ceremonial center instead of a living discipleship part of life in society. And so we have lost Paul's thought. The work is for the equipping of the saint. The gifts of the Spirit is for the equipping of the saint, for the work of the ministry, and for leadership development in society, helping people to discover their talents and their gifts, that they can use those talents and gifts to minister to each other and then to do ministry outward in the society. And then we talk about affirming people's dignity by meet them at their felt needs. We know man's greatest need, and usually when we approach people, we approach them with what we perceive and what we understand to be man's greatest need. But people don't respond necessarily around their own greatest need because they don't understand and know that. They respond around their felt need. And if you can then touch them around the needs as they perceive it, it opens the door for you to begin a communication process. And if you can touch their needs in a way that affirms their dignity, that you both respect them, you identify with them, you identify with their needs, like the Bible says about Jesus, that we have not a high priest who cannot be touched. He can be touched with the feeling of our infirmity, because we was all tempted like as we are, that he knows our needs, he knows our pain. And so we, being his agent in the world, must enter into that pain that they have and identify with that need. And that's what leaders are designed to do. Leaders are designed to identify with the felt need. Bob Pierce puts it so beautiful. Let your heart be broke with the thing that breaks God's heart. You're meeting God at the heart of the meeting humanity at the heart of their need. I guess that's why healing, that's why his supernatural power, that's why casting out demons was so important. He was meeting people at their deepest emotional need in life. So the felt need concept becomes a principle
by which we communicate the deepest need.
If you don't meet people that have felt need, you will overpower them and you will make them dependent. You need to help people in the area of their pain, you know, and then they have a sense of gratitude. But if you give people stuff without it being, and they will take it, but they'll take it to their own destruction, and they'll become dependent. And if we're not careful, that many of our charitable programs create more of the people that we want to serve. We could limit that service if we could then meet them at their need and meet their real need in life. You understand? And then we would be healing people. We call it the felt need concept. And number 4 is we call it a holistic approach, that we're concerned about the whole person. We're concerned about their mental, social, spiritual, physical condition, and we're concerned about the justice and the culture and the economics and the emotional behavior of people. You know, and we try to bring politics back to its original form and to organize a subdivision of people of living together and sharing their resources through taxation and other ways. We try to bring politics back to serving the people and the precinct in which the people come from in the society, and that's holism.
And there's a need to touch people in a holistic way in different areas of their life. And each person have so many different needs, and then we have to meet people around those needs. And so there's a holistic idea, is whatever the need might be in that person's life, that we want to try to at least dialogue, feel that need, and then come up with a holistic approach to that, both the individual need, but also to the community's need within the society. So that's what we're talking, to meet the needs of the body, soul, and spirit of a people.
Holistic development. And then, of course, it needs to be empowering. Number 8, it needs to be empowering. And how do you empower people? That's the most difficult. And I don't quite like the way we use the word empowerment, because I don't like the idea that human beings give each other dignity. I think that's patronizing. I think dignity was established in creation, when he said, you are created in the image of God. I think what we have to do then is affirm that creation, affirm that dignity, and to release the power and the potential of people. That's complicated.
When I think about empowerment, I'm thinking about releasing the power that is in people, releasing the inherited dignity of people. And in order to do that, many times it takes training, it takes motivation, it takes incentive, and it takes helping people to take their own initiative. And we say that's the idea of not doing for people what they can do for themselves. It takes involving people into the plan of what it is we're going to do, plan with them. And the idea then is to give people full responsibility for what it is you're going to develop.
And the way we think that you can begin with that is made up out of what we call 3 basic components. You help people to have ideas together. You plan with the people. Merge your ideas together. Ideas are powerful. Ideas are powerful. And so you merge your ideas. You plan with the people. You give people responsibility. Responsibility. That leads to a sense of ownership within the project. They make a contribution to what's going on in society. And then, of course, you always remember, don't do too much for people that people can do for themselves. That's what makes when the baby walk is so important. When the baby walk, that's important. And usually when a baby walk a few times, they don't want you picking them up anymore. That's good. You're sharing their responsibility with people. That is the kind of development that we are committed to, and that we believe that this is the kind of development that can enrich our world. Thank y'all for listening to me.